Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're here to discuss the results of the investigation into the December 6th shooting at Pensacola Naval Air Station. Joining me today are David Bowdich, who is the Deputy Director of the FBI, Rachel Rojas, who is the Special Agent in charge of the Jacksonville Field Office, John Demers, the Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division, Larry Keefe, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida, and Mike Sherwin, who was a national security prosecutor in Miami, but is currently serving in the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. I want to thank the FBI and the other federal, state, and local enforcement agencies that were involved in responding to and in investigating this incident. I want to thank them for their rapid and excellent work. Many people worked long hours through the holidays, and I'm grateful for their diligence and their commitment in seeing it through. And you'll be hearing from the Deputy Director shortly about the details of the Bureau's investigation, which was truly superb. In considering this case, we have to remember that there are thousands of Allied pilots and other military personnel who receive training on military bases throughout the United States. These military partnerships are critically important to our country. The Royal Saudi Air Force, which flies American-made aircraft, is an important military partner and has long had a training relationship with the United States. On December 6, Second Lieutenant Mohammed Saeed al-Shamrani, a member of the Royal Saudi Air Force, entered a building on grounds of the Pensacola Naval Air Station and killed 3 U.S. sailors and severely wounded 8 other Americans. He was killed during the attack. This was an act of terrorism. The evidence shows that the shooter was motivated by jihadist ideology. During the course of the investigation, we learned that the shooter posted a message on September 11th of this year stating, "The countdown has begun." During the Thanksgiving weekend, he then visited the 9/11 memorial in New York City. He also posted other anti-American, anti-Israeli, and jihadi messages on social media, including 2 hours before his attack. Early reports indicated that the shooter arrived at the site accompanied by other Saudi cadets who took video during the attack. These reports turned out not to be accurate. The shooter arrived by himself. The other Saudi cadets happened to be in the area, and after the attack began, they took some videos of the resulting commotion around the building. They fully cooperated in the investigation, as did all other Saudi cadets who were interviewed by the FBI at the base and in other bases around the country. After al-Shamrani entered the building and cased the facility, he proceeded to walk around, shooting down his unarmed victims in cold blood. During and after this heinous attack, there were many specific acts of courage, and I want to draw special attention to 2 U.S. Marines, Gunnery Sergeant Ryan Mazel and Staff Sergeant Samuel Mullins. They were outside the building when they heard the gunfire, and although unarmed, they ran into the building to confront the shooter. Their only weapon was a fire extinguisher that they pulled off the wall as they ran toward the gunfire. Although they were unable to engage the shooter, they helped save many lives by giving CPR and other urgent medical aid to the victims. I would also like to mention the heroic acts of Navy Airman Ryan Blackwell. The shooter shot Airman Blackwell 5 times, yet he managed to jump on top of a fellow sailor to keep her from being shot, and then assisted other students and helped them escape, all while taking fire from the shooter. Ryan Blackwell's heroic acts saved countless lives that day. And we're grateful for the bravery of the base personnel and the local law enforcement responders who initially arrived at the scene and engaged the shooter. I would also like to address the cooperation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia gave complete and total support to our counter-terrorism investigation. They ordered all Saudi trainees to fully cooperate. This assistance was critical to helping the FBI determine whether anyone assisted the shooter in these attacks. While there is no evidence of assistance or pre-knowledge of the attack by other members of the Saudi military or any other foreign nationals who were training in the United States, we did learn of derogatory material possessed by 21 members of the Saudi military who were training in the United States. 17 had social media containing some jihadi or anti-American content. However, there was no evidence of any affiliation or involvement with any terrorist activity or group. 15 individuals, including some of the 17 I just mentioned, so there is overlap, had some kind of contact with child pornography. While one of these individuals had a significant number of such images, all the rest had one or two images, in most cases posted in a chat room by some other person or received over social media. The relevant U.S. attorneys' offices independently reviewed each of the 21 cases involving derogatory information and determined that none of them would, in the normal course, result in federal prosecution. However, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia determined that this material demonstrated conduct unbecoming an officer in the Royal Saudi Air Force and in the Royal Navy, and the 21 cadets have been disenrolled from their training curriculum in the U.S. military and will be returning to Saudi Arabia later today. The Kingdom has assured me that it will review each of these cases under their code of military justice and their criminal code. The Kingdom has also agreed that we will have full access to anyone we want to interview in Saudi Arabia and any documents relevant to our investigation. Indeed, they have already been providing documents. Further, the Kingdom has assured us that if we later decide to charge any of those being sent back to Saudi Arabia in connection with this counterterrorism investigation, they will be returned for trial. We appreciate the Kingdom's cooperation in this case. Finally, I want to address an issue regarding the shooter's phones. The shooter possessed 2 Apple iPhones, seen here on the posters. Within one day of the shooting, the FBI sought and received court authorization, based on probable cause, to search both phones in an effort to run down all leads and figure out with whom the shooter had been communicating. During the gunfight with the first responders, the shooter disengaged long enough to place one of his phones on the floor and shoot a single round into the device. It also appears the other phone was damaged. Our experts at the FBI crime lab were able to fix both damaged phones so that they are operational. However, both phones are engineered to make it virtually impossible to unlock without the password. It is very important for us to know with whom and about what the shooter was communicating before he died. We have asked Apple for their help in unlocking the shooter's phones. So far, Apple has not given any substantive assistance. This situation perfectly illustrates why it is critical that the public be able to get access to digital evidence once it has obtained a court order based on probable cause. We call on Apple and other technology companies to help us find a solution so that we can better protect the lives of American people and prevent future attacks. With that, I will turn things over to the Deputy Director of the FBI, Dave Bowdich.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to offer a brief overview of our investigation into this particular attack. As you can imagine, this has been a large and incredibly complex investigation. with dozens of investigative entities being involved. Let me start by what we've done so far. Since the beginning of this investigation, the FBI and our partners have been united in one goal: to determine if the shooter acted alone or if anyone helped him. To explain the scope of the investigation, so far we've interviewed more than 500 people, with witnesses, base personnel, and the shooter's friends, classmates, and associates. Even today, we continue to run down any new leads in an effort to find as many answers as possible for the victims and their families. For more than a month now, this has been an around-the-clock investigation. As the Attorney General mentioned, this occurred on December 6th. That is going into a holiday season where our folks work 24/7 as necessary throughout the holidays. This investigation involved hundreds of special agents from the FBI, intelligence analysts, and professional experts from around the country, in addition to our counterparts, which I will talk to you about in just a minute. We've employed dozens of surveillance teams and executed, served, or obtained numerous search warrants, subpoenas, court orders, and emergency disclosure requests. We've also collected more than 42 terabytes of data, digital media, in an effort to exploit that data, and the effort to exploit that data continues to this day. While we're still searching for more information, so far we have not identified any co-conspirators, any evidence that the shooter acted with anyone else, or that he was inspired by any one specific group. Social media attributed to the shooter suggests that he harbored anti-U.S. military and anti-Israel sentiments, and that he thought violence was necessary to defend Muslim countries. In addition, just prior to the attack, a statement was posted to his social media accounts, which had many parts of Anwar al-Awlaki, a now deceased senior leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. It had many messages that were very similar to Anwar al-Awlaki. And during the attack, the shooter fired shots at pictures of the current U.S. president and a former U.S. president, and a witness at the scene recounted that he made statements critical of American military actions overseas. Regarding the attack, I can now share that this shooting lasted approximately 15 minutes. Naval security forces engaged the shooter approximately 8 minutes after the shooting began. And we've determined that he was ultimately killed by law enforcement officers who responded very bravely that day. At the crime scene, we found a semi-automatic handgun with an extended magazine, several ammunition magazines, and approximately 180 rounds of ammunition. As announced previously, the ATF identified the shooter's weapon as having been lawfully purchased in July 2019 in the state of Florida. It was purchased under a hunting license exception. This exception allows non-immigrant visa holders who otherwise are not permitted to buy firearms or ammunition to purchase them if they have a valid state-issued hunting license, permit, or other required documentation. Partnerships are crucial in any case like this. Unfortunately, we have way too many cases like this. But I do want to take a moment to thank our other partners in this investigation, to include other federal, state, and local agency partners for their hard work. And they include the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the ATF, the Homeland Security Investigations, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I especially want to recognize the brave Naval Security Forces personnel who responded to the initial call for help, as well as the Escambia County Sheriff's deputies who also responded and very bravely ran in to face down danger. They did their jobs that day, and they did them well. Those heroes saved lives that day. We do believe that very firmly. And 3 of them paid a price for it. 3 of them were wounded that day. All 3 are recovering, but they paid a price for it that day. I'm also grateful to our FBI Jacksonville field office and its personnel, and a host of supporting FBI headquarters personnel and resources from other field office. As you can imagine, when you have a significant crisis investigation like this, we will surge resources from throughout the country, and this case was no different. Finally, I want to echo the Attorney General's point about the challenge that law enforcement faces from default user-controlled encryption. The FBI continues to work with our private sector partners to find the right solution for accessing the digital evidence we need to stop criminals and terrorists alike. We're not trying to weaken encryption, to be clear, and after all, data security is a central part of our mission. But even with a court order, to date, we cannot access the contents of the 2 phones that the Attorney General referenced previously in this investigation, and countless devices in other investigations. We want to work together with the private sector companies so that we can lawfully access the evidence and information we need to keep our country and its citizens safe. This is not a problem that only the federal government has. This is a problem that affects our state and local partners, as well as many of our international partners, and we talk about this on a daily basis. We need to continue to work together between public and private sector to find a solution to this very challenging problem. Thank you.
Take some questions now.
Mike.
Mr. Attorney General, can you explain why none of the other students are facing federal charges if you've identified them possessing child pornography or sharing jihadist ideologies?
You mean none of the other, of the 21 that we're talking about? Well, as far as the ideological social media, it was not enough to trigger a violation of the federal statute, and the other cases were reviewed by the U.S. Attorney's Office under the standards they would use for anybody else, and they were not sufficient to trigger a federal prosecution.
If I could just follow up there.
Yeah.
Have you identified a purpose for the trip to New York, or do you believe that he may have been scouting other locations for another possible attack?
Yes. Good. Dave.
We have not. What I will tell you is there were other Saudi students throughout the country. It is not unusual for them to travel. We did extensively vet the places they went, and this was not an unusual activity.
Sadie?
I have 2 questions. One is on topic, and maybe you can answer this, but I was wondering if the FBI had ever been called to the base previously for an investigation into extremism, or that there had been reports of any other sort of terrorist behavior or jihadi behavior previously to the shooting.
No, the FBI in Jacksonville has not been called to the Navy base for any of those extremist views or anything like that.
Okay. My second question, shifting gears just a little bit. On Friday, the FBI director had told the FISA court some changes in the way agents are going to seek FISA warrants going forward. Has the Justice Department proposed any other changes to the way that the FBI should open counterintelligence investigations of political campaigns, or can you talk to us about anything you're considering in that front?
Well, we're considering, a number of additional things. Chris Wray and I have discussed a number of possibilities. One of the things that we have agreed on is that the opening of a counterintelligence investigation of a presidential campaign would be something that the director of the FBI would have to sign off on, and the Attorney General would have to sign off on.
After the San Bernardino problem, getting into the phone of one of the gunmen there, the Justice Department took Apple to court. Are you considering doing that in this case?
I'm not going to comment on that. Devin.
A question for the Deputy Director, if I may. Were the FBI's technical experts on cell phones consulted in the letter that was sent to Apple, and did they agree with sending that letter to Apple?
I don't know everyone who put eyes on that, but yes, the General Counsel would have involved them as a matter of course.
And they agreed?
I don't know the answer.
Evan?
On the issue of the strike in Iraq, on the Iranian general, the White House has told us that the Justice Department was consulted before the decision was made to do this. Can you explain to people in Congress, including conservatives, who have questions about whether or not this was a constitutional strike, given the fact that the Constitution gives Congress the right to declare war? And in this case, obviously, this is an act of war, and they were not consulted.
Well, the Department of Justice was consulted, and frankly, I don't think it was a close call. I believe that the president clearly had the authority to act as he did on numerous different bases. We had a situation where the Iranians had already embarked on a series of escalating violent action taken against our allies, taken against the American people, our troops, with the avowed purpose of driving us out of the Middle East. They had attacked shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. They had attacked oil fields in Saudi Arabia. They had attacked U.S. bases. They had attacked our embassy. They had killed Americans. These ongoing attacks were being planned and orchestrated by Soleimani. Our ability to deter attacks had obviously broken down. The Iranians had been given a number of red lines and were crossing those lines. They obviously felt that they could attack us and continue these escalating attacks with impunity. The general in charge of these efforts, Soleimani, was clearly a legitimate military target, and we had a brief window of time to carry out the attack when he arrived in Baghdad to plan and orchestrate follow-up attacks on American interests and American people, personnel. So this was a legitimate act of self-defense because it disrupted ongoing attacks that were being conducted, a campaign against the Americans, and it reestablished deterrence. It responded to attacks that had been already committed. Our purpose and our expectation was not to trigger a broader conflict or that events would spin out of control. On the contrary, we believed that the strike would restore deterrence and help avoid a continuing upward spiral of the violence.
General Barr, two questions, one on topic and one off. Did the investigation identify any vetting issues that could have led to the prevention of the attack? Anything that could have been noticed, passed along to authorities that would have indicated an attack was coming? And then I'll follow up.
Well, I think we've identified that the vetting should be improved of these candidates. I wouldn't suggest or speculate that improved vetting would necessarily have prevented this particular event. But I do think it's clear, and I think the Department of Defense agrees, that we have to improve our vetting procedures, and they are in the process of doing that.
Is that both pre and once the students are here, the pilots are here? And then if I could just do my quick follow-up on the other topic, in terms of the vetting.
I think we're talking about doing it before they come to the United States.
And then the follow-up question. Did you, in terms of the evidence regarding General Soleimani, see any evidence of a specific imminent threat, or was it more generic in terms of what had been done and what was generally thought that was being planned?
I'm not going to get into the specific intelligence. I believe there was intelligence of imminent attack, but I do believe that this concept of imminence is something of a red herring. I think when you're dealing with a situation where you already have attacks underway, you know there is a campaign that involves repeated attacks on American targets. I don't think there's a requirement, frankly, for knowing the exact time and place of the next attack, and that certainly was the position of the Obama administration when it droned leaders of terrorist organizations. Yes.
There are two questions about Apple, quick questions. What is Apple willing to do here? You said nothing substantive. What are they willing to do here if the company's willing to do anything at all?
I don't know what they're willing to do.
Second question, how big of a problem is this on a larger scale for people at home to understand, you know, the battle in between technology companies and law enforcement and what you're dealing with? Is this something you've seen a lot or some of your associates have been dealing with for a long time?
Yes.
Seems like.
We're seeing an increasing number of these cases, and it involves not only data at rest, that is, data stored in devices, as is the case here, but also data in motion, that is, intercepted communications that we're unable to decrypt. Even though we know those communications involve the planning of deadly attacks or cartel activity or the exploitation of children. And it's becoming a grave problem.
And your hands are tied now, even with a court order.
Yes.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah. Attorney General Barr, when did the consultations begin with the administration over the strike? And with General Soleimani's death, has the threat from Hezbollah to targets inside the United States been diminished?
I'm not going to discuss, the details of or the timeline of consultations. And the second part of your question had to do with what?
With General Soleimani's death, has the threat from Hezbollah to targets inside the United States been diminished?
I'm not going to speculate about that.
Two quick questions on the Soleimani attack. Did you give any special consideration to the fact that he was the senior official of another government, that he was the general of the of Iran, and
he was the head of a terrorist organization?
Was there any special consideration given that he was also a senior official of another?
Well, military targets are appropriate, legitimate targets.
And the second question: do you have concerns about vetting of other people inside the U.S., training with the U.S. military, or are there broader concerns that it wasn't just limited to what happened in Pensacola, that there might be a more systemic issue?
Well, I don't think there's any indication of that, but I'm sure that when the Department of Defense considers its vetting process, that'll probably have implications beyond the kingdom. Okay.
That the FBI has exhausted all of its efforts, everything available, including private companies, to try to get into these phones. They've done everything they can and are now just dependent upon Apple. Is that what you guys are saying?
Yes. But I would also hasten to add that we don't want to get into a world where, we have to spend months and even years exhausting efforts when lives are in the balance. We should be able to get in once we have a warrant that establishes that criminal activity is probably underway. Thank you very much.